Up next, we got Urban Jonson from the NMFTA. Big Bad Guys Compliance and a Tiny Budget. I love that title.
Well, we're a small business, and that's actually my other day job. And as any small business, we all have multiple roles to fill. So just thanks so much for having me here and getting an opportunity to talk about how we as a small business defend in the cyber realm where there are very big bad guys. We have compliance requirements, and we never really get enough money. So I work for a little company called the National Motor Traffic Association. Nobody knows who we are, but it's okay. We're an industry nonprofit representing about 450 trucking companies here in the US and Canada. We have some products that are used in the transportation field. About me, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the National Motor Freight Traffic Association. I'm also the Principal Investigator and Manager of the Commercial Transportation Security and Research Program. So most of the time when I'm speaking at conferences or events, I'm talking about trucks, cybersecurity, or transportation cybersecurity. I'm also a transportation subject matter expert for the FBI at InfraGard. But today we're going to talk about my other day job, which is actually keeping this association up and running and keeping it safe and secure. Right, so we're going to go over a lot of content here. So I have to apologize for it's going to be sort of a content-heavy presentation with lots of links. But I really wanted this presentation to be able to stand on its own so it can be redistributed and used by other small organizations so you guys can leverage all the things that we've learned and the things that we've been doing. All right, so we are a small business, a really small business. We have about 20 some employees, but we have online stores with credit card processing. We have a little bit over 50 servers and virtual appliances on our network. We have 2 production facilities. We run a bunch of custom applications and websites. We're also, unfortunately, mission critical for the transportation industry and one of the products that we provide. So for us, that means downtime is very, very bad. So if I have a breach, the first person I have to call is actually over at DHS to let them know that we've been hacked. So this adds a little bit of incentive for us to keep our act together, right? So as a small business, we all have common concerns, right? We have small budgets, right? We're always short on staff. I love these companies that have, oh, we're a really small group and we have, only 15 people dedicated to cybersecurity. Well, we have 0. Everybody's multitasking. So we have staff with multiple roles. This is very common when you have a small business. We have high uptime expectations. Just because we're small doesn't mean that we get to say, oh, we get to be down every other Thursday. So those expectations of uptime still, apply to all the small businesses. We also get stuck with DSI with compliance requirements. In our case, we have PCI DSS. We're also doing things with the DoD as far as transportation goes. So we're all looking at the new capability maturity model that the DoD is rolling out as well. Adds to the flavor and the excitement of being a small business. Well, the essence of surviving cybersecurity as a small business is planning, right? So have a plan, even for planning, right? So where did I start? When I started with NMFTA, what did we start to figure things out, right? So first thing is prep, right? When did Noah build the ark? Well, before the rain, right? So you got to know what you have. That's the very basic thing. If you don't know what you have, you don't know what's vulnerable, you don't know what to defend, none of that. Then you got to identify, okay, of what you have, which are critical. And there are some things that are critical and some things that are not, right? And then understand what state those things are in. When I first started at NMFTA, there were some things that were then there were some things that were really, really awful, and we needed to focus on those things first, right? So focus on the biggest risk. If you have a legacy system that loves to hold on to credit card numbers, get rid of it, all right? And attention to detail and configuration is one of the things I'm going to be talking about a lot during this talk. It's very cheap, it's very effective, and it really frustrates red teamers. And so what I have to confess is I'm very much the blue team kind of guy. I'm always on defense. I know it's hard. That's why I like it. So there's nothing I like more than giving my pen testers a run for their money, right? The other thing is document everything and keep hard copies, because if you get hit with ransomware, you can't look it up on the file server to figure out where it was, right? So one of the big problems that small businesses have is getting internal funding and support, right? We always say, can I have some more money for this? And the answer is, well, how does that, how do we make money off of that? Well, it's cybersecurity. Well, that doesn't sound like we make money from it. Well, so how do I talk about cybersecurity to my board of directors? Fun fact, I have more members on the board of directors than we do employees. So that makes it a very interesting challenge to, achieve success at that level, right? So I've had a lot of good luck using insurance as an analogy, right? Also developed a risk matrix with different scenarios, just some basic stuff: event impact, probability, risk score, nothing esoteric, right? And then talk to everybody in terms of, okay, this system that we have, how long can this thing be offline while we're trying to get it up and running, right? And then what is the cost of doing that? Now, most people will say it can never be offline. Well, it's going to have to be offline at some point in time to be patched, at least, right? And then can you survive with that being down for a day? Can you survive with that being down for a week? All right, and then you're able to, get to some sort of negotiation. But I actually have compatriots at other small businesses who are told that they have certain systems that can't be offline, even for backups and patching. Unfortunately, that happens a lot with people who own IBM iSeries or mainframes or legacy systems. And you know what? That's a huge warning sign. If in your small business you have a system that is so critical that it can't be offline for backups and patching, it's going to go poorly for you sooner or later. And this is one of the probably the most critical areas that you need to address when you're dealing cyber for a small business, right? So once you get all this information, you can work together with management, your board of directors, to make some trade-off decisions based on cost and risk tolerance, right? That's all that simple math is. But you have to be able to speak about it in a way that upper management can understand, because they're not going to understand when you start, babbling cyber tech at them. You have to explain it as a business problem, right? So here's one of the big things that I always like to tell people: you can't buy your way out, right? Contrary to all the floor at Black Hat full of vendors, there's no appliance, no endpoint agent, no tool, no blinky light that will save you, right? You have to put in the work. You have to design, you have to configure with care, and you have to avoid taking the shortcuts, right? We all like to, hey, we got it to work, and then we sort of walk away because it's working, rather than going back and tightening everything up after you're done, right? Which brings us to the next thing. Once you figure it out, what you need to protect, how do you configure it, and how do you harden it, right? Well, you may seem, well, what do I need to bother that? I'm going to get breached anyway, right? Well, it contains the damage that can be done once people are on your network, and it can buy you the extra time to find out that people are on your network before they do too much damage, right? So configuring, we know that most stuff that ships with horrible defaults and configuration options, right? Most people have default passwords printed on the box, or even global passwords. I remember Dell iDRAC controllers have a notorious thing for using the exact same password everywhere. Vendors focus on enabling functionality rather than security, because if they enable more security, they would get more tech support phone calls, and that's a cost that they want to keep down. So they're incentivized not to lock things down, right? And default passwords are employed on pretty much everything, and you have to change them, right? But also, most things ship with a generic role, right? But you need to figure out specifically what the particular device is going to do and configure it that way, right? Not leave it as an all-purpose Swiss Army knife, right? So the good news is that a lot of people are having to suffer through this with the rest of us. So try looking for scripts and tools that'll help find and validate configurations. VMware used to have a great tool. It's sort of, I think it's in a limbo state somewhere, where we used to go and scavenge all your systems, Windows, Linux, everything else, and then give you a report on configurations, and then apply that standards like PCI DSS or other best practices, and say, this is where your configuration is short, right? You want to find tools to help you do this, because it's a very time-intensive thing to do. Recheck your configurations on a regular basis. There is configuration drift, not just because you change things, but also firmware updates introduces new options, features, those sorts of things. So you want to make sure you keep on top of this stuff, right? It's a lot of work, but it is a high ROI on all this sort of stuff, right? And just scrutinize them and just look at these settings. That's really what configuring is all about, right? Hardening. All right, here's some blah, blah, blah text on what hardening is all about. Basically, it means rip out the stuff that you don't want and then lock everything else down, right? So what are the best practices for hardening your environment, right? Audit your existing system. Basically, that goes back to, if you don't know what you have, you don't know what you're doing. Create a strategy and a plan for system hardening. Don't just start trying to configure it. Work out, what are the critical assets, figure out a plan. It should be incremental, and it should be something that you go back and you expand the scope, go back, expand the scope. So it's an iterative process, right? Have a patching process. Off hours, you're going to have to suck it up and do off hours if you're a small business. I spent every Friday night, once a month, working from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. patching our systems, right? But you have to follow it with cultish devotion, and I'm not joking about that. Never push it out, never skip it. And then also, don't be afraid to emergency patch. Make sure you understand, right? Like Microsoft Exchange, you have to patch it right away. Don't wait the 30 days, to do it, right? And then pick up the loose change. Configure your firewalls carefully, blocking unused port services, using your network segmentation in your firewalls, access controls, all that good stuff, right? Then document all the settings, okay? And audit the firewall on a schedule too. I mean, we do that. You have to go through and double check your rules. As we go through and we set up new environments, we tweak things, we may open things up. It's always good to loop back at least every few months, check your firewall, audit the settings, make sure you're doing what you're supposed to do. You may actually find new ways of locking things down by doing that, which will help you even improve your posture further, right? There's the other thing, harden the service equipment before you put it in use, please. I think I forgot what the record is for for a server not locked down once you drop it on the internet, how long it lasts, but I think it's measured in seconds. So how do you do that? You figure out what the role is, you strip all the unneeded features and services, use hardening guidelines to figure out what needs to be changed based on the role, update, patch the firmware, operating system, and the applications. Don't skip the firmware. Never reuse local admin passwords, please. If it's virtual, you also have to harden it, the VM container. There's some great PowerShell scripts that we came across that'll help configure the settings on the VM containers to help lock those down, disable default features like USB and CD-ROM drives that are in there by default. Test hardening the configuration in test environment, not production, just a word to the wise. Like trying to lock down the email server at 9 a.m. on a Monday in production is probably not your best bet. Document your processes and have checklists. Everybody gets tired, everybody gets distracted. Checklists always help. In our organization, in the IT department, we live and breathe by our checklists for deployments, for configurations, and everything else, and it's always paid off for us. But don't forget to harden the applications, right? You got SQL Server, Exchange, backup software, we got all these other stuff that's running there, we got accounting systems. All these things come with default passwords, configurations that are usually fairly promiscuous. So figure out what you got going on, and then lock those down too, because they usually have a lot more of a footprint than you would think. If you want to have fun, just look and see how many vulnerabilities come out on SAP every month. Don't forget the photocopiers. We actually got hit hard in a pen test because somebody grabbed an image of the software from one of our photocopiers, and we're somehow through magic able to get some basic credentials out and take things from there. So don't forget your photocopiers and anything that ties into your network, especially anything that connects to Active Directory. If it connects to Active Directory, it's dangerous, and you need to make sure that you understand what it is, what it does, and then find out what the least privileges that it's need and set up accounts accordingly, right? Again, one of the fun things we learned, when you export from a firewall or a router or a backup system, make sure you go through and you clean up and get rid of any of those exports and migration shares that they may create, because they usually contain password data and it's usually not encrypted. This is a loose change you do not need to be leaving on the floor. And don't forget all the other stuff that we have on our networks, right? Even though we're a small business, we got switches, routers, printers, we got PDUs, we even have HVAC systems. That's always fun. So we basically have our industrial control systems tied in to our enterprise networks. Not a lot of fun when you're a small business because you don't have a lot of choices, right? But usually you have a Liebert air conditioning system, or if you have two, then you have a controller, and all that stuff tends to live on the network as well. So again, copiers, phone systems, even the physical security systems to your buildings may be connected to your network. Right, so making this a little easier, here's a giant slide with lots of hardening guides. These are some of my favorites. There are others, but if you do follow these or pull these up, this is a great place to start for locking down your stuff. Right, but all this aside, next step is, well, you locked everything down. What's next? Well, monitoring. Everything you just did is great, but your defenses are going to fail. And if they fail, how are you going to know? Well, the only way you're going to know is if you monitor, right? This is one of the things, and people say this is fatalistic. I don't think it is. I think it's just prudent planning, right? If I will design my network differently, knowing that someone will eventually end up on that network that doesn't belong, right? So eventually somebody's going to get on your network through, compromised workstation because somebody didn't have an updated browser. They're going to bypass a firewall to a zero day. I mean, some of the stuff that we've seen in the past year just makes me shake my head, right? And even then there's insider threats who can try to, compromise your systems as well, right? So the basic thing is monitor everything. Windows workstations log, we saw some great stuff on, expanded Windows logging through Sysmon, which is something that we do now. I'll tell you more about that. And this is all great stuff that we need to be looking at. You need to look at servers, your firewalls, network traffic volume if you can. There's some tools for SFlow and NetFlow that are not drastically expensive. You need to monitor Active Directory changes, software installations, monitor and log everything you can, right? But what do you do with it, all right? Well, once you have the monitoring and everything else, it's not enough. You have to test your defenses. You have to test your monitoring. So test your configurations and run tests to make sure that the right alerts are popping up in time for you to see them, right? You do that through pen testing, vulnerability scanning, red team exercises, workflow simulations. The last one always gives people a little bit of a pause. What I mean by that is make some changes in Active Directory, like elevation of privilege. Make sure the first thing that's in your inbox is an alert saying, hey, this user just got promoted to system administrator on this particular local workstation. That's the sort of stuff that should be at the top of your alert list, right? Monitoring on a budget. So we don't get to buy the big, giant enterprise SIM systems and all the other stuff. We have to keep everything on a small budget, right? So one of the things that we use, and I'm just putting this out there for what we use, is not full-throated endorsement. I'm not saying to go out and buy all this stuff, but this is what we use. So we use a company called EventSentry. They have full monitoring capabilities for someone our size, with, and pricing that goes along with it. We use something called IP Monitor, which is an older network monitoring system by SolarWinds. SolarWinds, Urban? Seriously? Yes. They tried to upsell me on some product called Orion or something for enterprises, but we never bought into it, and we're using that old IP Monitor, and it seems to be working just fine. And apparently it was not among the compromised systems, but we still keep a close eye on everything. But there are other tools out there that are cost-effective and affordable, right? So do your research if you're a small business, check with your colleagues, ask security providers. The most expensive is not always the best because the large enterprises stuff focuses a lot more on workflow where you have 20 people working the same issue. If you're in a small, medium business, it's not going to be that case. So for a good testing example, NMFTA hired Scythe for a purple engagement. And according to Bryson, no polka dots, that was extra. And one of the things that we did was we assumed the network breach and ran adversary simulations. A cost tip, you don't need to have to prove that they can breach your perimeter. Just assume that they do and give the good folks at Scythe or whoever you're using a workstation and let them start. It saves you a lot of money, and you're trying to prove something which you don't need to prove. Maintain and share good network documentation, right? You don't want to pay consultants who get paid, $200-300 an hour to document your network. It's much more effective to just give them that information, right? Our lesson that we learned from the engagement was that almost all the endpoint inline security products that we had failed to detect anything. So what we did was, since Scythe is a very good organization as far as working with us and working with the community, we got them to work with our monitoring vendor, EventSentry, to help tune the monitoring in our network based on the attacks. And we got significantly improved defensive posture just through better alerting and better monitoring. Getting those two organizations in, and we didn't have to spend any additional money on any additional toys or things like that. So the other thing that you need to do is, as a small business, which has been really helpful for us, is to be innovating, right? So be a black sheep, do things your own way, right? You got to think outside the box. Design unorthodox creative networks. Now, this is not just creating the most complex thing you can see, but do things that are a little bit outside the norm, right? You can do a lot of fun stuff with network segmentation that's going to frustrate everybody. And just please don't use just 192.168.1.1 for, your firewall and then go from there. You can basically, if I see stuff like this, everybody can kind of map out what the rest of your network looks like. So don't do that. Be creative, right? Divulge as little info as possible inside your network. Assume somebody's going to be sitting there and locking up all your information. So make sure that anything you pass on your internal network is encrypted, and make sure that the server names are as opaque as you can make them, right? And then use honeypots. KF Sensor has a good one. There's plenty of other low-cost options, so that what you're trying to figure out is when someone gets on your network, you actually know about it. And then with the hardening, hopefully you'll be able to figure it out before too much damage is done, right? My favorite thing to do is to incorporate dynamic defenses, right? So if we see this, do that. Anything you can think of, scripts, triggers, file monitoring, any of that sort of stuff that will make you less static, right? The whole idea behind this is to make the opposition suffer and get them frustrated, right? Because the genuine thing is hackers are lazy, and if we make them work really, really hard, they're going to get really, really annoyed, and then hopefully make a mistake, and we'll see them, right? So real quick, I want to say a few words of compliance for those unfortunate enough to need it. So we are a small organization, but we still have PCI DSS compliance requirements. If you've done PCI DSS, it's a very long and arduous self-assessment questionnaire with lots of policy questions. But just don't check the boxes. Do the necessary work. A lot of the stuff is policy and process based. Check with your peers about sharing templates, policy text. SANS has some great resources about cybersecurity policy text that you can use to meet some of the requirements. Right. The hard part is getting and staying organized and keeping all the documentation up to date. And it's really worth the investment to getting yourself organized before you start. It'll just make the maintenance and upkeep much better. So save time and use a task tracking system to track all the daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, biannual, and annual tasks. Don't, stick it in a calendar, do whatever you need to make sure that they get done, and then log and document the completion of a task, include evidence, log files, statements, screenshots, whatever you want to do. NMFTA, we built a simple app that ties into Active Directory, which provides a nice authentication component about who completed the task. Find some task tracking tools that works for you. Make sure the assignments are clear. Make sure everybody knows who's supposed to do what and when. And then keeping evidence of performing the task will make the lawyers much, much happier, right? So I know I'm going through this very fast. I have to apologize. It's a lot of content, not a lot of time. So we're going to do a ransomware public service announcement. This is some of the things that we've picked up as far as being able to defend ourselves against ransomware. So back up your data regularly. Make sure you can restore it. Make sure that you have cold backups so that you have something that can be maintained that is completely offline. Have an incident response plan. Make sure you know how to rebuild all your infrastructure from start to finish, including servers and everything else. Make sure you understand how to build them from scratch. Make sure you have printed instructions for how to do this. Do the obvious, the edge security appliances. A lot of malware comes in through email, so pay particular attention to email defense. Patch everything. Just please keep patching. Systems, applications, browsers, every 30 days. If you need help figuring out what's what, CISA has a wonderful weekly vulnerability list, right? Run vulnerability scans and mitigate any issues. This is not too expensive. Lots of different tools. Don't ever put remote desktop protocol RDP stuff on the internet. It's just wrong. We should not do it. Just don't. All remote VPN access should require multi-factor authentication and endpoint roles. So for example, make sure that the computer is part of a domain. If you don't have users that are based in Russia and China, don't accept VPN connections from other countries, right? And make sure you're locked on your user accounts. No one should have admin privileges to any computer, right? All the admins should have two-factor admin, but even the system administrators shouldn't be a system administrator all the time. You don't need to be the domain admin to go check your email. Run up-to-date malware antivirus. Again, this is like the lowest level of things, but you can't forget to do the easy, low stuff first, right? So some bonus ransomware resources. We've got some stuff on our website at NMFTA, including a ransomware playbook template. It's all in Word. You can download it, modify it, I'll use it. It's a great resource. CISA has some other great resources. The NSA put together some cybersecurity mitigation strategies as well. So that's one of the great things that I like about Scythe. Seeing the community that it brings together and the opportunity to get other people involved, I think it's a fantastic thing. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so happy to be involved here. So one of the things that we did when we had the engagement here with Scythe and Event Century is we actually put everything out for everybody else to use. So now everybody should be able to see. So at Event Century, if you look at this, you can actually see where we put all the rules that we developed with Scythe and Event Century. They put it in a free little package and tells you how to use Sysmon and Scythe and all that sort of stuff. So that's now up at Event Century. So that's how we like to give back to the community. But it's all there if you follow the links. So this is how we share, because we can't all do this by ourselves, right? One of the things that NMFTA has done is we put something out there called Project Bouncer. This is a tool, a fun thing that we did so that we can make our outer shell a little bit more dynamic and not so static. So it's another way that we like to annoy and frustrate people who come to scan us and poke at us. It's kind of a fun thing, so check it out. It's a dynamic. It allows you to build dynamic defenses based on rules. So it has a RESTful API for programmatic updates for blocking network traffic. We have a lot of fun with this. So quickly wrapping up, trying to get ourselves back on time here. So what did we learn today? Well, we talked about planning, configuring and hardening. We talked about monitoring. We talked about innovating. We had a few words on compliance for those unfortunates who, like me, who have to deal with it. We did the ransomware public service announcement, and we also talked about community and the importance of giving back. So, winning, right? We like to, good defense requires organizational commitment, hard work. It has to be systemic, repetitive, and reproducible. And it requires collaboration, not just inside the organization, but without. And it doesn't have to be expensive. Just because you're a small business and you can't afford the big boy tools doesn't mean that you can't do a good job at defense. All right. This is one of my signature little slides that ends up with every presentation that I have, which is any small change that you're able to make right now can have a dramatic impact of where you are 5 years down the road, and even 6 months down the road in that where you are with the next cybersecurity incident that you have inside your organization. So I thank everybody for their time today. Again, it's a pleasure being here. I'm sorry I churned through so much content so quickly, but again, I was hoping that this presentation would serve as a resource. So feel free to redistribute it, send it to any small business customers that you may have, and hopefully everybody will get something out of this.
Urban, I think that was fantastic. I think we talk so often about that. It's too much in this industry. Not only are we in our own echo chamber, but we talk only to the folks that have the resources, right? We debate these fringe edge cases that affect the 0.001%, when the reality is most businesses are in your boat. Well, not your boat, because y'all are pretty well off now, but
right.
And so I think that's fantastic to kind of give folks the opportunity to see the plan laid out and show that it is possible for them to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have, the $1 million budget with a 30-man cybersecurity team. You can do things to protect yourself, even if, like me, you have 3 or 4 roles at the office.
Well, we appreciate you taking time from all of those roles to join us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
All right.